So as we're moving forward, Maximilian Dixon, he's our geohazards subject matter expert. He runs the tsunami, the volcano, and earthquake program for Washington State. And a lot of you have probably seen his presentation. Goes around basically giving you knowledge on tsunamis and volcanoes and earthquakes. So tonight, obviously, he's going to talk tsunamis. And he's got all the information as far as the tsunamis. We're going to talk a little bit about grant procedures, too, on how to maybe help you guys get some funding for a shelter. Besides that, Maximilian.
Thank you, Stacy. Thanks, everyone, for showing up. I always love coming out here. That's a great venue, wonderful questions. So today, really going to cover just kind of a snapshot for our risk here, but then we're really going to talk about tsunami vertical evacuation structures. So how are we going to save the community, right? How are we going to get you guys to safety and what that takes, what those steps are. And then a little bit about funding, and then we'll open up to questions. So I hope you have lots of questions because I'm here to try to answer as many as I can. So earthquakes and tsunamis happen, right? So are we ready? Are we truly ready? And I think the answer is no. We've got a lot of work to do, right? But we know we've got the risk, and we have some steps to move forward. So that's exciting. So Washington State, we have the second highest earthquake risk in the country. So California's first, we're second. And as you can see on this map here, we have a lot of faults around the whole state. And we're still discovering faults. So the whole state is at risk. Now, some of the risk that we're talking about here, we've got three different types of earthquakes. We've got the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake, which is the big one, right? It's 700 miles long off the coast. And when that one goes, man, it's going to be really bad, right? And that's what's really going to cause the huge tsunami and what we're really talking about today and what we're trying to save lives. So we've got that Cascadia subduction zone. There's about a 10 to 20% chance that that's going to go off in the next 50 years. It's been 318 years since it went off. We know it's due. The plates are locked. It could happen at any moment, and that's really the scary one, the 9.0 earthquakes. Shake up to 5 to 6 minutes. And then you're going to have tsunami waves within about 15 or 20 minutes that's going to hit the coast. So this is the really scary one. And then, of course, you've got, with the plates moving together, which is causing, this risk here for this Cascadia subduction zone earthquake. That pressure is also, putting cracks into our crust, the North America plate, and it's causing a couple different types of earthquakes. You've got the crustal faults, which are right at the surface of the Earth. So you got the Seattle Fault, the Tacoma Fault, South of the Island Fault, really on Puget Sound. Those are also devastating. Now they're a little more locally central, and they don't happen as often, right? So there's a lot less frequent, and so the chance is lower. It's about 5 to 15% chance that something like that's going to go off for a crustal fault in the next 50 years. And then you have the deep fault earthquakes. So how many folks in this room were here for Nisqually? Okay, so that was 2001. So what I would categorize that as is kind of the smaller end of the large earthquakes that we can get. Really, it's just really about, we had 400 injuries. We had about $2 to $4 billion worth of damage. It's just it's a big earthquake, but man, nothing compared to a crustal fault or the Cascadia subduction zone fault. Now, those kind of earthquakes, those deep earthquakes about 30 to 50 miles below the surface, they happen about every 30 to 50 years. So we're pretty much guaranteed we're going to have another one within the next 50 years. And we're not sure exactly where it's going to be, but so there's three different main types of earthquakes that we have. I'm showing this animation here. Sorry if I'm blocking anyone. But what this is, I know it's kind of hard to see, but what this is you've got the Cascadia subduction zone went off, and these are the first waves that are arriving. You've got Ocean Shores here, you've got Westport here, and you can see the waves completely overtop Ocean Shores and Westport. And there's a series of waves. So with tsunamis, you've got waves that are going to be hitting the coastline for 12 to 24 hours, multiple waves. And the first wave is not necessarily the highest. In Japan, I believe it was the fourth wave was the highest. But as you can see here, they just keep coming and coming. And this gives you just kind of an animation. Again, I know, I apologize, it's kind of hard to see. But it shows you some elevation here and what the risk is. And these waves, they go all the way into Puget Sound. So they'll hit Tacoma within about 3 hours after the earthquake. And so again, you've got about, for the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake, the big one, potentially up to 5 to 6 minutes of shaking. And then 10 to 15 minutes later, you've got the first waves arriving. So it's not a good situation. But Well, we can do some things, and we're gonna talk about that. Now, as far as tsunami risk goes as well, just kind of a snapshot for Washington State, we've got about 50,000 people who live in the tsunami inundation zone on the coast. During the winter time, during the summertime, you got all the summer visitors, recreation and everything. We have about maybe up to 200,000 people that are out in the tsunami zones, out on the beach or camping, visiting. So quite a flux between the winter time and the summer, as you folks out here know. And then we've got at least 30 schools that are in the tsunami inundation zones. And so, we've got a lot of school kids that are at risk. So it's, the communities, schools, and a lot of children are at risk. So we've got a lot of work to do. As some context for sort of a background here, looking at what's going on in the world for other subduction zones, because Cascadia subduction zone is not the only subduction zone that we have that are causing major earthquakes around the world. We've got what we call the Ring of Fire, whole Pacific Ocean, where a lot of activity is happening. And in 2004, the Sumatra earthquake, that went off for about 10 minutes. That shook for about 10 minutes. That is a long, long time. Does anybody know how long the Nisqually earthquake shook for? About 30 seconds. Yeah, so imagine 10 minutes. That's going to be pretty scary. So, tragic. About 220 to 250,000 people lost their lives, and mostly from the tsunami, from the 2004 event. I mean, that was very devastating, and it was a wake-up call for a lot of folks. And in 2010, we had a Chile earthquake. Over 500 people lost their lives. In 2011, we had the Tohoku earthquake in Japan. Between 16,000 and 20,000 people lost their lives. So these are happening around the world, and there hasn't been activity for a long time for our subduction zone. These are some pictures here from September 28th. This is actually a bridge that got wiped out, a big metal bridge. And this is a huge ship that got brought into the community here. I think it's in one of the neighborhoods. But this was from the 28th of September, this event. And it was kind of unusual in the sense that the earthquake happened underneath the land, not underneath the water. And due to some underwater landslides and some unusual conditions that are kind of similar to what we have here in the Puget Sound area, it caused a devastating tsunami. It wasn't supposed to. We didn't expect it from a scientific standpoint. But unfortunately, it took about 2,000 lives for this event. And this is, it's just one of those things where we do modeling and we're studying as much as we can to understand the risk. But there's going to be events that, like this one that we just didn't anticipate. So this is why we really want to be overcautious and be as prepared as possible. So, are we next? Well, that's a big question, right? It's a big question. We don't know, so nobody can predict earthquakes right now. But we're going to assume that we're next, and we're going to take action accordingly. And this is why you're here tonight and why we're working together. So we want to make sure that we get you to safety. You get yourselves to safety. We develop these vertical evacuation structures so everyone in Ocean Shores can survive. I mean, that's the goal, right? It's the goal for me. I hope that's the goal for you. So what are we talking about here? Well, unfortunately, again, it's kind of hard to see, but we've got a little walk map right here. We've got Ocean Shores. And essentially what this shows is anyone basically in here, you're not going to be able to make it to high ground in time before the first wave arrives, right? Based on the modeling. So this is based off of walk speed, and we tell everyone, please don't try to use a car because your telephone poles are going to be down. You're going to have liquefaction everywhere. People are going to be, potentially crashing into things. I mean, it's really trying to get to as high a ground as possible. But I just wanted to show this because it's a tough situation right now, and evacuation options are far and few between. And so, this is why we really need to build vertical evacuation structures here. So what are we talking about? We developed a manual that actually just got finished yesterday, and we will be sending that out this week. And this manual was taking lessons learned from all of the vertical evacuation structure efforts that we've had here in Washington State, interviewing the stakeholders, the successes, the things that maybe didn't quite go so well, and some lessons learned to say, okay, how do we do this? How do we build these structures? What is all of the steps, right? So I'm going to go over some of these steps here, just kind of walk you through this. So obviously, number one, involve emergency managers. So myself, emergency manager for the counties, for the local level, just making sure that we're involved. So we say, okay, we know who the right partners are. Get us involved early. Let's figure out this process. Let's get you started. And then assessing, your tsunami risks and your situation. So, that's part of, I'm going to show you a couple of maps here in a minute. And essentially, it's looking at, okay, what is your risk for the community, right? Now, we know Ocean Shores is a huge risk, right? So we've done a lot of modeling. We understand what the risk is. So we got to make sure, what are we facing here? And then what are your evacuation options, right? So is there high ground, walking through that process of just how many vertical evacuation structures are we going to need? Let's look at the community. How many folks live there? Where do we need to start building these things? And then really engaging the community. So that's kind of a baseline discussion, and then engaging everyone here in the community. The local champions, city council members, everyone and anyone to make sure that we get everyone around this and say, how are we going to do this? How are we going to get everyone to safety? How are we going to make sure our community is safe? Move forward. What are the steps we're going to take? Because there's a lot of great input. Local knowledge, leveraging of resources, sharing, working together as a community, because this is really about saving the community. So we want to make sure everybody's involved so that we can get as much buy-in as possible. And then, of course, getting a committee together. So because this is a long-term process. There's going to be a lot of vertical evacuation structures you're going to have to build. And so it's going to be a long-term process. So making sure you've got a good core group of people, and people will switch out as things go on. But if you have a good core of people, just like any project, you got to have that core of people that are really going to be working on this and dedicated. And then, of course, public meetings like this one, and then just having an open process. So just like this, what is the process? Who's making the decisions? What are the steps? What do we need to do? What are the challenges? So that we can collectively work on them together. We can overcome the barriers. We can make sure people understand what's going on and then are providing that input. Just making sure that we're all working together. And then phase 4 is where you get more into the details of what are the sites? Where should we put these structures? Where does it make most sense? Is it next to the school? Is it next to the community center? Is it where? For each community, it's going to be different because the risk is different. The layout of the community and the city is different. So it's going to be something you're going to have to decide as a community. Where you start building these structures, where it's going to have the most impact, and then have a plan to make sure that you're going to be able to build all the structures that you need to. And that people understand this process and this decision-making process so that we're working together on this. And then, of course, some suggestions here are sites near dense populations, near schools, because we want to save our children, and making sure that the sites are on high ground. So when I say high ground, I mean any ground that's higher that we can build a structure on, because you're going to have to build that structure pretty high. So the higher ground you can do it on initially, the less it's going to cost. So looking at these kind of things, and we'll walk through that more in detail as we go through kind of a site process. Not tonight, because unfortunately I don't have enough time, and we're going to need some more people to actually discuss that, and you're going to have to bring some more people together. But essentially coming up with that plan. What are these viable sites? And luckily, there was what we call Project Safe Haven. And so here's a couple maps. About 6-7 years ago, Project Safe Haven through the University of Washington, university folks came out with emergency management and actually looked at Ocean Shores and said, hey, where does it make sense to put structures? And just about how many would you need based on the population and the types of structures that can hold a certain number of people. And so 20 sites were identified and proposed with a capacity of 9,200 people. Now, I haven't looked at the latest demographics, for the population of Ocean Shores. So that's something that city planner is going to have to look at and say, okay, how many people do we have? You know, is that still the same number? And then if you can see here, and again, I apologize, it's hard. The darker areas are the higher inundation. It gets up to 60 feet for the dark areas, and that's how high the water is going to be, potentially. And then as you see the lighter areas, then the water is a little bit lower down here in the back end. And then there's some, I believe they're red dots. I'm colorblind, I apologize. But I believe these are red dots, and this shows kind of the location of the 20 proposed sites. And then here you've got some of these sites are broken up into towers, to sort of some berms. There was just some ideas based on the locations and the site specifics on some ideas on what these structures would look like. So you have, based off of this Safe Haven project, you've got a good starting point for potential locations. Now, some other things to consider are who owns the land, right? Because if you're going to have to purchase the land, that's more expensive, you know, and maintenance, and then, you know, just looking at walkability, people getting there. So there's details that have to go into this site selection process. And starting out with that first structure is absolutely essential. I cannot emphasize this enough, but starting out with that first structure and really coming together as a community to decide where do we build that first one. Because how that process goes, how you make that decision, and you know, it can make a big difference on building the rest of the structures, because it's all about that teamwork. It's about, you know, figuring it out for the community, having that first win where you build that structure, it's in the right place, and then you start looking at what are the next ones. It's absolutely essential you get that right, and that'll really set a tone for moving forward. So some examples here, we've got the Ocosta Elementary School. I'm sure everyone has heard of the Ocosta Elementary School. It was the first tsunami vertical evacuation structure built in North America. It was a success story, but there were some challenges. So they didn't get federal funding, but that process, by applying for federal funding, paved the way for other projects to get federal funding. Partly why we're here tonight, because there's an opportunity for federal funding for a vertical evacuation structure for Ocean Shores, and we're trying really hard. We want to make sure we get that. So Ocosta paved the way, but they paid for it. They put a bond up 3 times to replace the school, and it failed twice. But on that 3rd attempt, because they added the tsunami vertical evacuation component, they did the right amount of outreach, it was in the right location, it passed. And so I think, gosh, talking to Chuck, I think he was talking about it was like $20 a month or something, or maybe it was $9 a month that he pays for that structure. And so it was a huge success story. It really, really drove and has given us a lot of impetus and a lot of movement forward to build other structures. And it was really a big test for all the partners involved to get this first one going. And just it holds 1,000 people. It can hold more, but it's, you know, it's engineered as far as space-wise to hold 1,000. Obviously, you can cram some more people there if you need to for a small amount of time. And it's 53 feet tall, so it's definitely tall enough, you know, to withstand. And it's got these 50-foot concrete pilings that go all the way down to make sure that the building's anchored. So if cars run into it, other debris, you know, it's going to withstand the shock of multiple waves of things hitting this structure. And there's many, many ways to get in. Well, there's 4 towers, but there's many ways to make sure that the doors are open so that all community members can use this facility. Another success story is the Shoalwater Bay Tribe. So they applied for pre-disaster mitigation funding, which is what's being applied for tonight, or not tonight, but I mean for this fall, for the vertical evacuation structure here for Ocean Shores. So same funding process, same application process. And this was the first time that a vertical evacuation structure was awarded funding through FEMA. So this was a huge success. It was $2.2 million. Total project, I think, is 2.5. And it's a tower. And what's kind of cool about this is a couple things. One, it's a double-decker. It holds about 400 people, but they're going to have room for supplies. So they're going to have everything that people are going to need for a few days to be up there. And we think they're going to be able to put some radios, so they have some communication capability up there, and use that as a testing facility for their local ham radio operators and sort of community emergency response folks. So they can use this to do some testing. And another great thing about this is the Shoalwater Bay Tribe, I think they have something like 80 or 90 people who would take advantage of this this facility to protect themselves, because those are I think it's about 80 or 90 people that actually live in the tsunami inundation zone that can't get to high ground. Well, they built capacity for 400 because Tokeland, this is right next to Tokeland, so they wanted to make sure that all the folks who live in Tokeland would have a vertical evacuation structure to go to. So it's really a huge success for communities coming together. So I wanted to highlight that. So vertical evacuation design. So just really simply, because I have limited time here, but just real simply, what are we talking about here? Well, we want to make sure that these structures are designed rock solid and that they're safe and they're not going to be overtopped by a tsunami, right? So some safety factors in here. So we've got the modeled tsunami inundation level, this sort of dotted line. So here's, just as an example, let's say we model this here, right? Well, we want to make sure as a 1.3 safety factor, we've bumped that up 30%. And then we want to make sure that we've got an extra 10 feet or 1 story on top of that. So we've got a 30% bump to make sure as a conservative estimate, because we're not 100% sure on our modeling. We're pretty good, but we just never know until the event happens, and an additional story, because we want to make extra careful that this vertical evacuation structure is going to work. And then, of course, you saw the pilings and all the massive amount of concrete and support that goes into these structures. So phase 5. So this is where we talk about funding, right? Because funding is absolutely critical. And you've got to look at your funding sources. So Ocosta was built from local funds, right? They did a bond. They did a school bond. Then we've got some federal funding. I'm going to go through a couple options here. But there's a lot of different ways that you can fund these. So I won't go into all of those, but you're going to have to think creatively and long term. What are your options? What are we going to shoot for? How are we going to be able to fund these? And then, of course, applying for grants, which Washington EMD, we're working very closely, City of Ocean Shores, to make sure we get those robust application in, and we can do the best we can to get the funding through FEMA. And then having a backup plan. So with Ocosta, they also applied for FEMA funding, but unfortunately it wasn't eligible at that time, so they were able to locally fund it. So just being flexible in that sense and having multiple options. And then, of course, local support, everyone here, absolutely. And then again, I can't stress enough the sort of open, discussion, dialogue, the process. Make sure, because this is for the community, and this is really serious for saving lives, and so making sure that process is robust is absolutely essential. And I will come down here, and my folks will come down here. We will come down here as many times as it takes. We're dedicated. We want to make sure that this project is successful, that future projects are successful, because we want you to be safe, we want you to survive, and we know you can't. So we're going to do the best we can. So we'll work with you. So some of the funding options here. We've got hazard mitigation assistance grants. So essentially these are money that gets passed through FEMA for disasters. So let's say we have wildfires, right? Let's say we get $100 million for wildfires, right? And then a certain percentage of that money then we get later on through these grants to say, okay, let's do some mitigation projects in the state. Let's do seismic retrofitting or build tsunami vertical evacuation structures. So we get a certain amount of money, but there are, there's rules we have to follow. But what's great about these is we can get a lot of money if we do it right. Now again, Ocosta Elementary School, unfortunately we're not eligible, but they paved the way. So a couple, I highlighted Shoalwater Bay Tribe, which was a success, but also in the 2017, we had a grant award for advanced assistance. So we call that, it's not a full project, but what it is some funding to put together to a robust application for a full project. So it's doing some initial modeling and getting the design together and really making sure you've got a solid package to apply then for the full funding. So in some communities, we're doing that as well. So again, it's different processes, right? So we're all moving forward, but some communities say, hey, okay, we need a little bit of funding. We're going to put a good plan together and then move forward for more funding. Some communities, like Ocean Shores, are like, all right, we're ready. Let's get that application in. Let's get that first project going, right? So there's different options here, but some definite success stories. So just as a few specifics here, and I'll try to answer as many questions as possible. Stacy can answer some questions. And then, of course, our mitigation folks, Todd Kilpatrick and Tim Cook, our State Hazard Mitigation Officer, we have many discussions with them and bring them in for more detailed answers to walk through this process. But I'm just going to give you kind of a general overview. So what we're talking about here with the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program is a cost share. So there's always a cost share. So 75% federal funds, 25% local and state. So in Washington State, we match half of that. So we pay 12.5% through the state, and then locally 12.5%. So you have to think, let's say, $4 million project, right? So 25% of that is going to be local state, right? So you've got what, 125%. So that's like $1 million, right? So then you've got 500,000 of that is local, right? So you always have to kind of consider that for HMGP. And then period of performance. So these take time. So this is why this planning is critical, because the cycle for the applications, that takes time, and then, to go through that whole process, and then to get awarded, and then, you get the funding, and that could take, a year or a year and a half. And then you've got the project. So you have 3 years to complete the project. So this is a lot of planning, a lot of time. I know this is competitive statewide. So what we mean by that is we have a disaster declaration. Let's say we had the wildfires. We got $100 million for repairing the roads and all of that. And then now we've got $20 million to do these types of projects. Well, there's competition throughout the state. So folks put in their applications, and then we decide based on priorities that we've decided that particular year. And this is all dependent upon disasters. So the more disasters we have, well, potentially the more money we have. And then who's eligible? So counties, cities, fire districts, essentially agencies that are within a hazard mitigation plan or have a hazard mitigation plan. And that essentially means that you've got a plan where you've looked at your disasters, you've looked at your hazards, you've identified some priorities and some projects, and you're going to be doing some risk reduction. So you've thought it through, you've got this approved plan in order to get this funding. And then, of course, it varies. It's really disaster dependent. But what's really important, I just want to make sure you had this, and I will be happy to answer questions after the presentation because we've got plenty of time for that. But I just want to make sure this was aware that because you're going to have to do multiple tsunami vertical evacuation structures, right? So this could be an opportunity a year or two from now, right? So I just want to make sure you had this, you had a little base understanding of this opportunity. So pre-disaster mitigation. So essentially what this is we're trying to do projects before the disaster, right? But this is money that's available annually, but it's nationally competitive. So all 50 states, and the territories, everyone can apply for funds through this. Now what had been tough previous years, we didn't have much money. I mean, we're talking maybe $20, $30 million, or maybe a little bit more for everyone in the whole state. Or the whole country. Well, that's not a lot of money to go around. Very, very, very competitive. But this year, $235 million. That's a lot more money. So we have a lot more opportunity here to get projects from Washington State funded. And this is what we're going for, is through this pre-disaster mitigation application here, through this funding pot. We have pretty good shot, right? I can't guarantee anything. I'll never do that because I don't make the call. FEMA does. Through the national system, right? So that's so we can't guarantee anything, but we have a pretty good shot this year. There's a lot more money. I mean, we're talking about 161% increase, right? And it's looking good potentially for next year as well. So some definite opportunities, and jump on this. The cost share here is, again, 75-25. Now the difference is the 25%. We don't match that at the state. So the 20, and for the HMGP, we split 12 and a half, 12 and a half. For this one, the 25% is at the local level. So again, if you're talking about a $4 million project, you're talking about $1 million for local share. So again, out of my hands, but that's the way the split is. But again, we have a huge opportunity here. And again, the Shoalwater Bay, last year, they got awarded. And very, very similar project. And I can tell you that folks that I've talked to in the federal government are really excited about building these. And this is kind of the hot new thing for funding. And it's a huge need, and they know that. So we're going to do our best. So a little bit of the process here. So you've got sort of a pre-award phase where we, the state, announce to the the counties and the cities and say, hey, this opportunity is here. Again, this is annually. We invite folks to do a pre-application. It's literally like a paragraph or two to say, yeah, we want to do this project. So, okay, great. So we look through these projects. And then since we have a limited amount of projects we can put forward through this funding opportunity, we look at the most robust ones, based on the priorities. And then we say, okay, you got a good project. We want to support this. So now put in the full application. And that full application, and this is not a lot of time, unfortunately, but that full application for this year is due November 30th of this year. And it's doable. We were asked by the Shoalwater Bay Tribe about a month, so October 30th around, say, hey, we want to apply for a vertical evacuation structure. And I said, yes, fantastic. Wait a minute, we have 30 days. Okay, so we got the team together, and we made it happen, and they got awarded. So it can happen, and you're ahead of the game here. So putting this together, again, that's due there. And then, we look at these applications. We make sure, have you filled them out? Or is everything there? Can we help you out? So we provide that technical assistance to make sure that that application is as robust as possible. And then we submit that to FEMA. And they select which applications get a further review. They want more detailed questions, and that goes on for a while. And then we kind of wait and cross our fingers. And then hopefully the magic award happens. And then, start working on the project. So a couple things here. So what's eligible and what's not. So for pre-award, what we mean by pre-award is you have to be careful, because when you get awarded federal funding, there are certain things that they'll reimburse you for, which is important because every dollar counts, right? So things they'll reimburse you for before they award the actual money to you. And then there's things that are kind of post-award things that you have to watch. So I just want to walk through this list. I apologize, I'm going to read off the slide. But so staff training necessary to complete the application. So this is important. Any type of training you need, to get folks to be able to complete the application. Staff time in developing that application, because it takes a lot of work. This is pretty detailed. Tsunami modeling. So having that initial tsunami modeling so you have a good idea for that particular site, what's going to be the inundation height, how powerful those waves are going to be. Just getting that site-specific information is really important. And then sort of the feasibility studies or technical evaluation. So we're looking at the engineering here for the type of structure, the sort of that's being proposed, right? So make sure we've got the right data and have that robust engineering evaluation. And then benefit cost analysis. So for every project that we're applying for through FEMA funding, through federal funding, you have to have a benefit cost analysis. Essentially say you are going to mitigate more than what it costs, right? So that it has to pan out that way, and this will be no problem for this project. Post-award costs, so site investigation and determination. So really looking at that site to make sure it's going to work. The acquiring land. So again, this goes back to sort of that site selection. If you don't have to buy the land, boy, that's going to save you some money. So that's going to be good. And then of course permitting and all that. Architectural engineering design. So you've got architects for the structure or for the kind of the aesthetics and some of the pieces, and then you got the engineering piece to make sure that it's anchored to the ground and it's going to withstand the impacts. And a peer review process. So I'm part of the peer review process for the Shoalwater Bay Tower, and that's something that was a little new for us, right? So again, since the first time funding was happening with Shoalwater Bay, we're learning a lot of things. And that's also in the manual to make sure that we've got all the processes captured here. But that's just to make sure that the design of the structure is robust. We've got the key experts, nationally, internationally, looking at this to make sure that that's going to withstand the forces that's actually going to protect people. And of course, permitting, inspections, and the construction. So these are, I just want to make sure I highlighted these. Phase 6, again, you got your project team. It's really important to make sure you've got a project manager, somebody who's going to oversee the project from start to finish. To make sure everybody's on schedule, on budget, everything's good to go. And having a team to back up that project manager. And making sure you get the most robust tsunami modeling to make sure everything's good to go. You're building the structure high enough, strong enough. And re-looking at the design considerations for capacity and all those details to make sure you've got your building to what you want, and just kind of going over those, and then building it. Then you go through that whole process of building the structure, making sure you're good to go, and then what I really like to do, celebrate. You've built your first structure, you're going to save lives, so celebrate. That's a big win. So we definitely wanted to have that in for the part of the process. So I know it's kind of quick. I ran you through these, but now I want to open up to questions.